The night was unusually cold for Lagos. Chief Olayinka's hands shook violently as he attempted to light his fourth cigarette, the flame dancing weakly against the darkness. From inside Flat 2, his wife's piercing wails sliced through the silence of 15 Ademola Street. He had never seen her break down like this. Not even when they lost their first child. "Jesus, Jesus, we are finished." Her voice echoed through the building's hollow walls. 18 months ago, he would have silenced her with a stern look. Back then, he was Chief Emmanuel Olayinka, oil magnate, owner of 3 mansions in Lekki Phase 1, and the proud father of 3 children in Oxford University. Back then, his word could move mountains in the oil industry. Back then, the memory of his former glory made him sick to his stomach. His gaze fixed on his Mercedes S-Class, his last reminder of that life, now being hitched to a rickety tow truck. The debt collectors hadn't even waited until dawn. Oga Chief Augustine, his gateman of 15 years, approached cautiously. "My wife say, make I give you this." He extended a wrinkled 1,000 note with trembling hands. The same gateman whose children's school fees Chief once paid without blinking. The shame was suffocating. A sudden movement from the topmost window caught his attention. There he was, Baba Agbabiaka, the ancient landlord, his silhouette barely visible in the darkness. Even from 4 floors below, Chief Olayinka could feel those eyes boring into him. The same eyes that had watched the Adebesis pack out last month, their tech company in ruins. The same eyes that had observed the Kader's gradual descent from computer village moguls to roadside recharge card vendors. The same eyes that had witnessed 12 families enter with dreams and leave with nothing but tears. The building seemed to loom larger in the darkness, its cream-colored walls now appearing grimy and sinister. Strange shadows danced across its surface, and for a moment, Chief Olayinka could have sworn he saw faces in the cracks. Faces of previous tenants, their expressions frozen in despair. "We should never have come here," he whispered, remembering the warnings they'd ignored. The suspiciously low rent, the rushed exits of previous tenants, the inexplicable string of misfortunes that befell every occupant. As if responding to his thoughts, a gust of wind carried the musty ancient smell that perpetually hung around the building. The same wind toppled a "To Let" sign near the gate, its edges yellow with age. Another family would come, drawn by the same desperate hope that had lured them all. Miles away, on the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, a Toyota Camry with Abuja plates merged into early morning traffic. Inside, Oluwadamilola gripped the steering wheel while his wife, Adana, excitedly showed him a housing listing on her phone. "Dami, look! A 4-flat building in VI, and the rent is almost too good to be true." The cream-colored building stood like a silent sentinel on Ademola Street, its windows reflecting the harsh afternoon sun. To passers-by, it was just another property in Victoria Island's maze of residential buildings. But the Okada riders knew better. They never lingered at its gate after dropping passengers. Inside Flat 1, Farouk Aliyu stared at the resignation letter on his laptop screen. 6 months ago, he had been the head of operations at a leading logistics company. Now his 3rd business venture was failing, and his savings were mysteriously disappearing. His wife Zainab had stopped asking why their 5-year-old daughter's school fees bounced last week. Above them, in Flat 3, Chibuike's medicine store remained closed for the 3rd day in a row. The latest batch of drugs he'd purchased had expired overnight. Impossible, yet it happened. His wife had taken their children to her mother's place in Enugu, just for a short visit, she'd said. That was 2 weeks ago. Madame Osazuwa in Flat 2 sat in her empty restaurant, arranging and rearranging her dusty chairs. The famous restaurant that once hosted governors now served only the occasional customer. She stayed because she had nowhere else to go. 3 years in the building had drained everything. But it was the landlord's flat that drew the most whispers. Baba Agbabiaka occupied the entire top floor, though few had ever seen him. His age was a mystery. Some said 90, others swore he must be over 100. The rent collector, a nervous man named Mr. Johnson, claimed the old man hadn't left his flat in 7 years. Yet tenants often reported seeing his shadow moving behind the curtains, always watching. Strange sounds echoed through the building at night, rhythmic chanting, the clink of metal, and sometimes what sounded like muffled cries. But by morning, when asked, no one admitted to hearing anything. The building had its own smell, a peculiar mixture of musty age and something else. Something older, darker. On particularly hot afternoons, the walls seemed to sweat, leaving dark streaks that formed patterns some swore looked like faces. It was on one such afternoon that the Toyota Camry with Abuja plates pulled up at the gate. Ademola stepped out, loosening his tie, while Adana gazed up at the building with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. They had been house hunting for weeks, rejected by countless landlords demanding 2 years' rent. Mr. Johnson emerged from the shadows of the generator house, rental agreement in hand, a strange smile playing on his lips. "Welcome to 15 Ademola Street," he said, his voice barely concealing his eagerness. "I believe we discussed the terms on phone. The rent is very reasonable." As they followed him inside, a sudden gust of wind slammed the gate shut behind them. Up in the topmost window, curtains twitched, and a shadow shifted. The stairwell seemed to absorb light, growing darker with each step despite the afternoon sun streaming through the windows. Adana's hand found Dami's, squeezing it as Mr. Johnson led them upward. Their footsteps echoed strangely, as if the building was hollow underneath. "The flat has been recently vacated," Mr. Johnson said, his voice bouncing off the walls. "Chief Olayinka's family, they had to relocate, quite suddenly." A door creaked open on the ground floor. Madame Osazua emerged, her once plump frame now gaunt, eyes darting between the couple and Mr. Johnson. "New tenants?" she asked, her voice carrying an undertone that made Adana shiver. "We're just looking," Dami replied politely. Madame Osazua opened her mouth as if to say something, but Mr. Johnson shot her a sharp look. She retreated into her flat, muttering under her breath, the sound of multiple locks clicking into place following her withdrawal. The apartment itself was surprisingly spacious. 3 bedrooms, a large living room, kitchen with modern fittings, all at half the price they'd seen elsewhere in Nice. The previous occupants had left in such haste that some furniture remained. A heavy mahogany dining set, vintage curtains, and an old mirror mounted in the corridor. "This is perfect," Adana whispered, already mentally arranging their furniture. But as she moved toward the master bedroom, something made her pause. In the mirror's reflection, she caught a glimpse of movement from the ceiling. A dark shape that vanished when she turned around. "The building has some unique features," Mr. Johnson was saying. "The landlord, Baba Agbabiaka, is very particular about his tenants, but you seem like a perfect fit." A sudden crash from upstairs made them all jump. It was followed by the sound of shuffling feet and what could have been chains dragging across the floor. "Just the chibuikes," Mr. Johnson said quickly. "They're renovating." Dami walked to the window, taking in the view of Ademola Street. A group of schoolchildren on the opposite sidewalk crossed to the other side as they passed the building, their laughter dying until they were well past. An elderly woman selling fruits nearby made the sign of the cross when she looked up at the top floor. "The price is incredible," Dami said, turning back to his wife. "Almost too good." "We'll take it," Adana interrupted. After weeks of searching, sleeping on her cousin's couch, this seemed like a miracle. Besides, she thought, fingering the small gold cross at her neck, what harm could come to a couple covered by divine grace? As Mr. Johnson eagerly produced the rental agreement, a cold draft swept through the flat, causing the vintage curtains to billow inward despite the closed windows. In the corridor mirror, a shadow seemed to smile. Above them, Baba Agbabiaka's heavy footsteps crossed the ceiling, stopping directly over their heads. The building creaked, as if settling deeper into its foundations, welcoming its newest occupants. The movers refused to stay after sunset. What should have been a full day's job was rushed through in frantic hours, with the men stealing nervous glances at the darkening sky. By 6 p.m., they were gone, leaving boxes scattered across the floor of flat 2. "They didn't even wait for their full payment," Dami muttered, staring at the abandoned trolley in their living room. Adana was in the kitchen, unpacking dishes when she noticed the first oddity. The marble countertop, which had gleamed during their inspection, now bore strange markings, curved lines that seemed to shift when viewed directly, but formed distinct patterns in her peripheral vision. "Dami," she called out, but her voice was drowned by a sudden blast of generator noise. Then, silence. "Power's out in the whole building," Dami announced, returning from checking the breaker. I'll go ask. A knock at their door cut him short. Outside stood Farooq from flat 1, holding a battery-powered lamp. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Welcome to the building," he said, handing them the lamp. "You'll need this. The power. It has a way of failing here, especially during the first night." "The first night?" Adana asked. "Just an expression," Farooq replied quickly, already backing away. "Oh, and whatever you hear tonight, whatever happens, stay in your flat. It's better that way." Before they could question him further, he was gone. As darkness settled, the building came alive with unfamiliar sounds. The walls seemed to inhale and exhale, creating drafts that whistled through invisible cracks. From upstairs, the rhythmic drag of furniture began, back and forth, back and forth. Dami was setting up their bedroom when he noticed their clothes in the box were damp, though it hadn't rained in days. A musty odor rose from them, the same distinct smell that permeated the building. In the kitchen, Adana screamed. The dishes she'd unpacked earlier were back in their boxes, but differently, stacked in precise patterns that formed concentric circles. "It must have been the movers," Dami said, but his voice lacked conviction. At midnight, the chanting began. Deep, guttural sounds that seemed to come from within the walls themselves. Their battery lamp flickered and died, plunging them into darkness, broken only by moonlight filtering through the windows. In that pale light, Adana saw something that made her blood freeze. The vintage mirror in their corridor showed reflections of people walking past their door, shadows of men, women, and children, all moving in a slow procession toward the upper floor. But when she looked into the hallway itself, it was empty. "Dami," she whispered, clutching his arm. "What have we gotten ourselves into?" Before he could answer, a heavy thud came from directly above their heads, followed by the distinct sound of chanting, closer now, more intense. The ceiling appeared to pulse, dark liquids seeping through in patterns that formed words in a script neither of them recognized. Their phones died simultaneously, though both had been fully charged. In the sudden silence that followed, they heard footsteps descending from the top floor. Slow, deliberate steps that stopped right outside their door. 3 knocks echoed through the flat. "Mr. and Mrs. Oluwadamalola," a voice rasped, ancient, dry as desert wind. "Baba Agbabiaka welcomes you to your new home." The door knocker sounded again, 3 measured beats that seemed to reverberate through their bones. Adana gripped Dami's arm, shaking her head frantically, but he was already moving toward the door. In the darkness, his normally confident stride had become hesitant. The peephole showed only darkness, a void deeper than the night itself. When Dami opened the door, the corridor was empty. But on their doormat lay a single white envelope, its edges trimmed in gold, the paper yellowed as if it had aged decades in moments. Inside was a handwritten invitation. "Your presence is requested, top floor." Now. The ink seemed to glisten wetly, though it left no stain when Dami's trembling fingers touched it. "We can't go," Adana whispered, but even as she spoke, their lights flickered back on. Except now they cast a sickly green glow that made the shadows dance unnaturally on their walls. A child's laughter echoed from somewhere above, followed by the sound of running feet. Then Madame Osazua's voice floated up from below. "Go. When Baba calls, you must answer. It will be worse if you don't." The journey up the stairs felt endless. Each step creaked beneath their feet, the sound amplified in the silence. The temperature dropped with every floor they ascended. By the time they reached the top, their breath came out in visible puffs. Baba Agbabiaka's door stood open. The apartment beyond defied physical logic. The space seemed vastly larger than the building's dimensions should allow. Hundreds of candles cast dancing shadows on walls covered in mirrors of various sizes and ages. Each mirror reflected a different scene. Some showed past tenants, others displayed moments from Dami and Adana's life they were sure no one else had witnessed. In the center of the room sat Baba Agbabiaka. He was both younger and older than they'd imagined, his face impossibly smooth yet ancient, his eyes holding the weight of centuries. He sat in a massive wooden chair that seemed to grow directly from the floor, its surface carved with symbols that moved when you weren't looking directly at them. "Ah," he said, his voice like rustling papers. "The new additions to our family." He gestured to 2 chairs that hadn't been there a moment before. "Sit. We have much to discuss." "What is this place?" Dami managed to ask. Baba Agbabiaka's smile revealed teeth that gleamed like polished ivory in the candlelight. This is where fortunes are made and unmade, where dreams become nightmares and nightmares become reality. He leaned forward, his shadow stretching impossibly across the floor. The question is not what this place is, young man. The question is, what are you willing to trade for success? From somewhere in the building came the sound of breaking glass, followed by desperate sobbing. In one of the mirrors, they caught a glimpse of Chief Olainka's face, tears streaming down his cheeks as he signed something in blood. Now then, Baba Agbabiaka continued, producing a contract that seemed to writhe on the table. Shall we begin? The contract shifted like living parchment, letters rearranging themselves as Dami tried to read them. The ink was dark red, and in the candlelight, it seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. You see, Baba Agbabiaka began, his fingers trailing across the paper surface. 15 Ademola Street has always been more than just a building. It's a gateway, a crossroads of sorts. People come here seeking fortune, success, power. His smile widened, and we provide. As if responding to his words, the mirrors around them flickered to life. Each one showed a different scene. Chief Olainka signing papers, his oil company's stocks soaring overnight. Madame Osazua's restaurant packed with politicians and celebrities. Chibuiki's small pharmacy expanding into a chain of medical centers. Farouk's logistics company winning massive contracts. But, Adana started. But they all failed, Baba Agbabiaka finished. Yes, because success, true success, requires balance. He gestured, and the mirrors shifted again, showing the aftermath. Chief Olainka's empire crumbling. Madame Osazua's empty tables. Chibuike's ruined business. Farouk's bankruptcy. Everything has a price, the old man continued. The higher you wish to climb, the further you have to fall. It's simply physics. He chuckled, the sound like breaking glass. A drawer opened in the ancient desk before them, revealing 2 items, a golden pen and a small knife with an ivory handle. The choice is yours, Baba Agbabiaka said. Sign in ink, and you'll leave tonight, free to find another home. Your lives will continue, ordinary but safe. He paused, eyes gleaming. Or sign in blood, and I'll make you gods in your chosen field. Money, power, influence, all yours. For how long? Dami asked, his voice barely a whisper. 7 years, came the reply. 7 years of everything you've ever dreamed of. After that? He gestured to the mirrors again, where shadows of former tenants wailed silently, their faces contorted in eternal anguish. Adana gripped Dami's hand. They thought of their struggles, the failed business attempts, the rejections, the humiliation of depending on relatives. 7 years of guaranteed success seemed like an eternity. The knife gleamed invitingly. Think carefully, Baba Agbabiaka said, leaning back in his chair. The building knows what you truly desire. It can feel your ambition, your desperation. Why else do you think the rent was so affordable? Outside, Lagos continued its nocturnal chaos. Horns honking, generators humming, life moving forward. But in this room, time seemed suspended, waiting for their decision. Dami reached for the table, his hand hovering between the pen and the knife. Adana held her breath. In the mirrors, their reflections watched with 1,000-yard stares, already knowing what choice they would make. Wait, Adana said suddenly, her voice cutting through the thick silence. Her cross necklace felt burning hot against her skin. What exactly happens after 7 years? Baba Agbabiaka's smile thinned. In the mirrors, shapes began to coalesce, dark, writhing forms that had once been human. Your essence becomes part of the building, he said simply. Your energy feeds its power, maintains its operations, just as those before you have done. As if on cue, a face pressed against one of the mirrors from the inside. Chief Olainka, but twisted, his features distorted by eternal agony. Next to him, Madame Osazua's previous form clawed at the glass, her mouth open in a silent scream. You see, Baba Agbabiaka continued, the building must feed. Success requires sacrifice. Your 7 years of glory will fuel 7 decades of the building's power. A fair exchange, wouldn't you agree? Dami's hand was still suspended between the pen and knife. Images flashed through his mind. His father's disappointment, the creditor's calls, Adana's quiet tears when she thought he was asleep. And if we refuse? He asked. The temperature in the room plummeted. Candles flickered violently, their shadows stretching into monstrous shapes on the walls. Then you break your lease? Baba Agbabiaka's voice had lost its smoothness, becoming something ancient and terrible. But the building has already tasted your desires. It doesn't let go easily. That's when they heard it, a sound they'd recognize anywhere. Their daughter's laughter, floating up from somewhere below. Kemi? Adana whispered, horrified. Their 4-year-old was supposed to be safe at her mother's house. The building, Baba Agbabiaka said softly, knows what matters most to its tenants, what they would do anything to protect. Dami's hand moved decisively, but not toward either object on the table. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. The screen was dead, but he pressed the power button anyway. To everyone's surprise, it lit up. What are you doing? Baba Agbabiaka's voice held an edge of uncertainty for the first time. Checking something, Dami said, his finger hovering over the screen. You see, before we came up, I set my phone to record. I wonder what the Lagos state government would think about these operations of yours? The room went deathly still. In the mirrors, the trapped souls pressed closer, watching. You're bluffing, Baba Agbabiaka snarled, but there was fear in his ancient eyes. Maybe, Dami stood, pulling Adana up with him. But are you willing to risk exposure? How many centuries of careful work would crumble if the wrong people started asking questions? The building itself seemed to tremble with rage. Objects flew off shelves, mirrors cracked, and the shadows on the walls took on monstrous forms. But Dami and Adana were already moving toward the door. We'll be out by morning, Dami said firmly. And you'll let us go, or this recording goes to every news station in Lagos. The journey down the stairs became a nightmare. The building, enraged at their defiance, threw everything it had at them. Steps disappeared beneath their feet, forcing them to jump gaps in the darkness. Walls pulsed and reached for them with shadowy hands. Every mirror they passed showed horrific versions of their possible futures. Run, Dami shouted, pulling Adana behind him. Above them, Baba Agbabiaka's laughter echoed, transforming into something inhuman. They reached their floor, but their apartment door had vanished, replaced by a solid wall. Down the corridor, the sound of their daughter's laughter echoed again, more distant now. It's not real, Adana gasped, clutching her cross. Kemi is safe. It's trying to trick us. The building shuddered. Pipes burst in the walls, spraying dark liquid that wasn't water. The floor beneath them began to tilt, trying to slide them back toward the stairs. From their neighboring flats, faces pressed against windows, current tenants watching with a mixture of pity and relief that it wasn't them. Farooq caught Dami's eye and mouthed something that looked like back door. They ran, skidding on the tilting floor, past doors that slammed open and closed, through corridors that shouldn't exist in the building's layout. The emergency exit sign flickered mockingly, moving further away every time they got close. You cannot escape. Baba Agbabiaka's voice boomed from everywhere and nowhere. The building owns you now. But they had reached the ground floor. The back door was there, simple and wooden, almost innocent looking. As Dami reached for it, Madame Osazua stepped out of the shadows. Wait, she said, her face haunted. Take this. She pressed a small, worn leather pouch into Adana's hand. Protection. I was too afraid to use it myself, but you're stronger. Behind them, the darkness was condensing, taking shape. The temperature dropped further, their breath coming out in clouds. The building's rage was becoming tangible. Dami yanked the door open, and they burst out into the Lagos night. But the nightmare wasn't over. The building's shadows stretched across the back alley, trying to pull them back. The walls themselves seemed to be extending, attempting to encircle them. Adana opened the pouch and found red powder, Cameroon pepper mixed with something else. Understanding instinctively, she threw it in a circle around them. Where it landed, the shadows hissed and retreated. They ran, past surprise security guards, past late-night street vendors who crossed themselves at the sight of them, past other buildings that seemed to lean away from 15 Ademola Street's influence. They didn't stop until they reached the main road, where the noise and lights of Lagos traffic created a barrier between them and the supernatural darkness behind them. Looking back, the building appeared normal again, just another high-rise in Victoria Island. But in every window, shadows watched them. And from the top floor, a figure stood at the window, its shape suggesting something far older and more terrible than Baba Agbabiaka's human form. Dami's phone buzzed. The screen showed a message from an unknown number. You may have escaped, but others will come. They always do. The building is patient. It can wait. The for rent sign appeared again outside 15 Ademola Street. New faces toured the building, their eyes bright with ambition, deaf to the warnings whispered by street vendors and taxi drivers. Dami and Adana watched the news reports from their small rented room in Surulere. Every few weeks, another success story emerged. A struggling artist suddenly landing major exhibitions, a tech startup getting mysterious foreign investment, a local politician's unexpected rise to prominence. They knew the cost of those successes. The building hadn't left them entirely unscathed. Their phones never worked properly again, filling with strange whispers and shadows in every photo. Mirrors became treacherous, sometimes showing glimpses of that night, sometimes revealing the alternate lives they might have lived had they accepted the bargain. Their daughter Kemi started drawing pictures of a tall building with eyes in its windows. They burned every drawing. But they had escaped with something more valuable than success. Their souls intact, their future their own. The recording on Dami's phone had disappeared that night, but it had served its purpose. Sometimes, though, in the deepest part of night, they wondered if their bluff had really worked, or if something else had let them go. Madame Osazuwa disappeared a week after helping them. Her restaurant stood empty, though passers-by reported smelling her famous jollof rice late at night, accompanied by sounds of weeping. They received wedding invitations, job offers, and business proposals, all requiring them to visit addresses that turned out to be 15 Ademola Street. The building was persistent in its pursuit, endlessly creative in its attempts to lure them back. One morning, Dami found a golden pen on his desk at work. That same day, Adana discovered an ivory-handled knife in her kitchen drawer. They buried both objects in consecrated ground, but knew it wasn't the end. Lagos continued its relentless growth, new buildings rising like concrete mountains. But 15 Ademola Street remained unchanged, its windows reflecting the sun by day and swallowing light by night. Sometimes, during power outages, people reported seeing strange processions through its corridors, shadows of past tenants still paying their eternal rent. The building waited, patient as the grave. Every month, new tenants arrived, their dreams ripe for harvest. Some noticed the subtle wrongness and left quickly. Others, driven by desperation or ambition, stayed to sign their contracts. And in their small Surulere apartment, Dami and Adana held each other through nights when the shadows grew too long and the mirrors too deep. They had discovered that success without freedom was just another form of prison, and some prices were too high even for the sweetest dreams. But sometimes, on quiet nights, they caught themselves wondering about those 7 years of guaranteed success, about the lives they could have lived. In those moments, they understood the building's true power, not in the deals it made, but in the eternal temptation it represented. The whispered promise that everything you ever wanted was just one signature away.